I've no difficulty with the technical amendments, Minister, but I'm going to use my time now and at the end of this to really say I am most unhappy with this bill. I cannot support this bill in its present form. And let me start by looking at that. You said that you're responding to the needs of survivors. Well, we have a special advocate, and when you appointed that special advocate, there was a press release that said you were going to value and listen to survivors. And I'm just going to use a little bit of it. The role of the special advocate will be to promote the collective interests of survivors as expressed by them, and to amplify their voices. And then you go on and on to say how important this role. The appointment of a special advocate for survivors fulfills a core commitment in the government's action plan, which recognises that the response of the government to the legacy of these institutions must be directly informed by the voices of those centrally affected. Now, I say reluctantly, Minister, that that's absolutely empty rhetoric. That was the start and the end of the story, because the special advocate wrote to all of us and wrote to the Minister the 25th of May, and she sets out clearly what's not in the bill and what should be in the bill after a whole consultation process back in 19 there. And just at the end of that consultation process, it's worth noting, Les Cangorla, the scepticism with which survivors met with the consultation process but still gave it their trust. Despite initial scepticism on the purposes of the scoping exercise, survivors and their advocates are very clear on what an ageing population of survivors need and want, both in Ireland and the UK, not just for themselves but for all survivors. They don't want talks about talks. Following on from that, and this directly bears to the amendments and the legislation that you're now pushing through, because here we have the advocate that you was very good that you put the advocate in place. What does she tell us? Inclusion of all survivors, and it's a very limited number, Minister. Very, very limited number that are now alive, most of them ageing, over 80, over 70. We have all the percentages. And what does that advocate ask us to do? Access for all. Currently, the bill is limited to those who previously received redress under the Residential Institutions Redress Act. A significant number of survivors, including those living overseas in prisons and in other institutions, were not aware or were unable to apply for redress. They're all excluded. Given the ageing survivor population, it is unfair and exclusionary to further discriminate. And at the end, when I come back, I'm going to talk about that discrimination and the harm that you keep perpetuating in the guise of a fair procedure, scheme after scheme, other than the one directly run by the Department of Education, which I'll come back to. Every single scheme has been unfair, discriminatory. In my role, and I won't read it all out, I don't need to. So what does she say? The bill should refer to any person who was resident in an institution specified in the schedule of the Redress Act 2002. I don't think that's too much to ask. I'd be asking for more, but that's what they're asking for. And then they go on to housing needs. As special advocate, I propose a novel, innovative, cost-neutral initiative. I don't know if the advocate is being ironic here, but imagine she's regarding this as a novel, innovative, cost-neutral to reassure you that survivors be given additional weighting in social housing waiting lists. Something as simple as that. The health services has been mentioned already. Let's stop calling it an enhanced medical card. And they're asking for the HAA Act, that was brought in under legislation for another vulnerable group. In my role as special advocate, I've spoken to over 1,200 survivors and affected persons. The very limited and less than effective impact of the proposed enhanced card has been consistently raised over the last 12 months by the Magdalene survivors and those who are now receiving this medical card under the Mother and Baby Home, another unjust, discriminatory scheme. What are we looking for? The HA card, as I call it, is the required card for all institutional abuse survivors, as it guarantees their rights to full and speedy access to health provisions and support for an ageing, marginalised, and may I say, they're marginalised by what was done to them by this state, and often vulnerable groups. And it goes on then for the health needs of overseas, and they ask specifically that the payment to people living overseas is increased at the very least up to 10,000. We put forward amendments for more than that. All of my amendments were ruled out of order. So I have tried to work the parliamentary system, all of them ruled out of order. Finally, I refer to the attached 2019 report commissioned by the Department of Education. So the Department of Education commissions the report. The report is published and utterly ignored. Finally, she refers to this report. In the final report, the top 2 priority issues for survivors were a request for the HAA card and a prioritisation of housing needs for survivors. Neither of those 2 nor the others have been included. Now, I say that as somebody who has both personal and professional experience of institutions. And I have watched, which I'll come back to, 22 years of apologies and over 100 years of institutionalisation. And each scheme defective. One, the Magdalene, led to the Ombudsman absolutely castigating that scheme for its discriminatory nature, a maladministration of the scheme. And we're here today doing the exact same thing, telling survivors we listen to them, and then absolutely ignoring them and ignoring the special advocate that you put in place to tell us what survivors want, all to save a few euros, when it would have been much simpler all along just to give a payment to every single survivor and indeed their families in terms of education. Thank you, Ken Cora, and I'll come back.